Hello, everyone. My name is Andrew Jez-Bray, and you are listening to Brad Zales on Awakened Nation.
A huge shift is taking place on planet Earth. People seem to be waking up. Tired of the way things used to be, they are creating something brand new and changing the world we live in. My name is Brad Zales, and I get to sit down with the next generation of idea makers, the disruptors, and the game changers. Everyday people just like you and me from all over who are doing amazing welcomes to Awakened Nation. Ladies and gentlemen, I have an awesome guest on today. If you're working in leadership development, talent and learning and all these areas in HR, and you're worried about your adult son becoming an executive someday,
As you should be.
yeah, I have the guest for you. Mr. Andrew Jez-Bray is in the house. How you doing, Andrew?
Great, Brad. Thank you so much for having me.
You bet. I want to dig in because a lot of the people who listen to the show, we've had Stephen M.R. Covey on and a lot of people in the space like Damon Lemby. How did you fall into doing this is probably my first question.
Well, falling is kind of a good way of putting it. My brother and I started in 2007. We started a small medical scribe business, a service-based business in the emergency medicine space. And I think I get unfair credit, Brad, for being this executive that scaled and sold a business where there was a lot of luck involved. I worked incredibly hard, but there was a lot of luck involved. So over the course of 7 years, we went from a really small company with 10 to 20 employees to, in 2014, close to 4,000 employees and contracts in 44 states, and it added a lot of gray hairs. But it was really, really a rewarding process. But after that 10-year run, and I stayed on for a little earnout afterwards. After that 10-year run, I kind of had this professional existential crisis, like, what now? I'm still young-ish, and I have more to bring to the world. And I just did a lot of reflection on what my favorite aspects of running that business previously, what were the elements, and the leadership, the people and change aspects were always the most fulfilling and the most challenging. And so my brother and I in 2019 founded Prax Leadership, which is the sort of a boutique leadership consulting firm that he and I operate and run. And I'm incredibly proud of the work that we do. But it was a fall into it. Never, I wasn't 14 years old saying, "Hey, I'm going to be doing leadership consulting." It was astronauts and doctors.
Yeah, you weren't going out at Halloween dressed in a three-piece suit with a briefcase.
I was
not. In case you don't know, Andrew just mentioned Prax Leadership, and it's a thought leadership boutique agency, as you say, in the rising field of neuroleadership. And you're probably thinking, ladies and gentlemen, what the heck is neuroleadership? A discipline that blends neuroscience and leadership development to build healthier, high-performing workplace cultures, which I love to hear because I'm a big fan. You and I have a similar background. I started a little design firm in 1993, and by 1996 we took it public, and suddenly I had 60 employees.
Wow.
And I'm gonna be honest with you, I had no idea what the hell I was doing. I had some great theories. Those theories worked well enough that we received an award for it from Arthur Anderson on fostering innovation amongst employees. But I have to tell you, Andrew, I'm one of those people who probably has done something right over here, but I have huge chunks missing in my ability to manage and help people get to that next level. Okay. So let's get into this, the science-backed leadership. I want to know how you discovered that there's a neuroscience part to this.
Yeah. I'm going to try to make this in under a 10-minute response. So first, neuroleadership is a subset in the field of leadership and neuroscience. It's almost like neuroscience and leadership decided to have a baby, and that's what they produced. And I am, for those that don't know, I'm getting a PhD. I'm 45 years old, and I'm getting a PhD in psychology. And many times I look in the mirror and say, why am I doing this? I got two young kids and a career and lots of other things to distract me. But it's been a lifelong dream to pursue psychology. But the reason I bring that up is that I had a professor recently tell me that you can't be a psychologist, a business psychologist, which is my aspirational next step, without also being a neuroscientist. And the point that he was making is that there's been so much progress in the last 10 to 20 years with functional MRIs and being able to scan the brain and understand what is happening during fight or flight, periods of stress, periods of joy, that you cannot be a psychologist and not also be a neuroscientist. So my answer is that if you're a leader, an aspiring leader, an executive today, you don't have to be, Dr. Neuroscientist, but you have to have some skill and knowledge around what is going on in the conductor of all of our actions, which is in our brain. So that has really attracted me. I started off in psychology, and now I volunteered to take a neuroscience class with no credit at my local university, Texas Christian University here in Fort Worth, and just called up the professor, Brad, and I said, "Hey, I'm old. Can I come be in your class?" And he said, "Absolutely." So I guess this, to summarize, is that if you're going to be a serious leader executive today, you need to be interested in neuroleadership, and why we make decisions is rooted in our brain and all sorts of components, our values, our priorities, what distracts us, what do we pay attention to, how we emotionally regulate, what habits we form, how we can break a habit. All of that is the epicenter is in our brain.
I'm just picturing you showing up on campus in person and like, who's the old guy? Don't worry, chill, man. He's cool.
Yeah, Brad, you are right. I haven't felt really insecure in many years, and I did. I felt very insecure showing up at this place.
I have a secret weapon. I don't look my age, so I wind up with millennials, and they'll be complaining about boomers, and I don't tell them I'm a boomer, so it helps. There is something that you just mentioned. You talked about Christian University, things like this. And I'm just going to use Christianity as the main glue right here, but when you get behind a banner at work, whether it's Dell, IBM, or Christianity, it seems to be easier to align people because the values are already built in. Am I correct on that?
I think that's a great point. Of course, yes. Shared values is a great foundation for forming any sort of team or sense of belonging.
Right. So let's dig into why we should place people first, because that was one of the first chapters I wrote in my book, Liquid Leadership, because I felt if you're the type of leader, let's say you don't have a lot of money in the cachet to reward people properly, you've got to get creative on how to motivate people.
Yeah.
And so one of our big motivators when I was at K2 is we reached a certain point where we realized we weren't just an entrepreneurial startup at that point. We were actually, we had dollars and cents behind it. And I realized we put together such a great corporate culture and environment that nobody wanted to leave. I mean, we had 6% attrition for, I think it was 7 years. Nobody wanted to go anywhere.
Very, very low. Nice.
Yeah. And so we made the environment contagious. What do you recommend today for today's entrepreneur, but also these established brands where they don't know what to do with the culture? They're kind of scratching their heads and they're like, well, people are motivated to the point, but as an executive, you're not really in the corporate culture, so you don't know how to impact it. So let's start there.
Yeah, I guess I will make 3 brief points. One, the traditional model for employee retention has been attract, hire, and retain. It's sort of like the old model. This is what we do. We go find them, we get them on board, and then we retain them. And that model is oversimplified, broken, doesn't work anymore. The updated model is I need to attract, hire, develop, and then re-attract. And I think this works with almost any relationship, a marriage, a friendship and with your employees as well. And there is a mountain of literature out there to support that after about 4 to 5 years, employees need to be reattracted to their business.
Yeah.
So I would say that's the first thing. And then this is incredibly cheesy. I know that it is, but in order to make a dynamite hire, I recommend T&T. And this is the two T's stand for technical and team. And I think this is overblown. If you are the first part, if you are not technically able to do your job, you should not be in the seat. If you're a coder and you can't code, you're a CFO and you can't read a P&L. If you can't do the technical aspects of your job, you don't belong. Well, it
Right.
turns out that that's not why executives and employees get fired. 89% of the time, people are removed for their job because of soft skill deficits, not because of lack of technical expertise.
Whoa, wait a minute. Soft skill deficits. For those of you listening, soft skills is like communication, the ability to interact with your team. That kind of blows my mind what you just said.
It's a staggering statistic, but yet when I tell people that, they go, yeah, because anyone that you've been around who was removed, got fired, or ultimately raised their hand, it generally wasn't because they were technically not proficient. It was because of all of the other team dynamics. So the other T is team, and you hit the nail on the head earlier, Brad. You hire for values. That you have to hire for shared values. And people that know me, I know that I make a lot of marriage analogies because I think it is an institution that can teach us a lot about relationships, what's
Right.
done wrong and what's done right. And we both know that a marriage will not last if there's not shared values. And
I agree.
it's one of the number one things. And on a lesser level, corporations tend to be obsessed with personalities. And I think personalities are way less of an effective area to look at than just looking at behavioral values. What is it that you care about? Because there's going to be conflict regardless. We're human beings. But if we have shared value system, then we're going to stay connected as a team. We'll also have people self-select out. And the last thing that I'll say, Brad, on that component is that I think culture is a very difficult thing. It's super slippery to understand. If
Right.
you're a leader and you're looking for something that is simple but not easy, like one thing, this is generally what I tell people, is if you're in charge of people, you're a boss, you're a leader, and there's one thing that will improve culture is pay attention to your people.
Right.
This is number one. Pay attention to your people. When Harvard Business Review, Gallup, they produce the same list every single year why people leave. Money is usually in the top 3 or 5, but it's never number one. It's almost always a relationship with your boss or general culture or engagement. And the number one way to improve that is to pay attention to people. You need to give your people your eyes, ask them questions, be curious, be interested in who they are as people, and you will see your culture improve.
I love that. You mentioned Harvard Business Review. One of my favorites cover stories they did was the breakdown of Netflix because Netflix changed how they hired. In the past, you'd try to hire somebody and you'd go through it and you'd realize I can't find an A player, so I'll hire two B players. And
Okay.
Netflix said, no, none of that anymore. And one of the things I love that they did, they had all their people managers go away. I don't know where they took them. They went on a retreat and they asked them to meditate, close their eyes, meditate, visualize where you want to be in 1 year. Okay. Where do you want that team to be? And then work backwards on who you're going to hire to meet that goal. And they kept asking them to do that. That was the number one thing that stood out for me.
Beautiful.
And they got the team members involved in the hiring process because they have to work with this guy. And if he's a jerk, guess what? And so they could spot a con artist right away. The team
Mhm.
could. And I feel this is incredibly important because this is hiring with purpose. This is hiring with alignment. Do you help companies do that as well?
I wish I had a resounding yes answer that would certainly make this interview more interesting, but that's not really our focus. We tend to help companies work with their established employees and executives to help them grow personally first before professionally. And it's really back to my other point about technical and team. If you're not technically proficient, you shouldn't be in the position. So we're not
Right.
teaching them to be better at their role. We're teaching them to be better in their role
Right.
and as human beings. And so our focus, and I hope I'm answering your question, our focus
Sure.
really is alignment with their personal values, their ability to think clearly, to connect with others, to improve their habits. And we know that the research translates when you have well-being and you have alignment, that directly translates into performance in your job. And so many businesses miss that. They're highly performance focused, professionally focused, and they ignore that we are whole human beings. We're fathers, we're mothers, we're friends,
Yeah.
we're aunts, we're uncles. And that's where the root of well-being and performance, that's the wellspring.
There's a generational component to this, obviously. And one of the big generational components that I discovered many, many years ago, which is, boomers came at the tail end. I'm a cusp boomer, so I'm at sort of the end of that World War II generation. Um, we were taught to hire fire till you got the team you had or the culture you wanted. You pounded it and molded it into what you wanted. And this whole new way of leadership has come along because we're doing high level work now. We're doing more mental and creative work. So a different type of leadership model and business model has to take place.
Mhm.
I wrote a series of papers for Dell on this, white papers, where we compared it uh, to sitting in an orchestra pit as opposed to being in a jazz quartet.
Okay.
And so I want to ask you, do you find that generational component in a lot of the organizations you work with, where there's a resistance on one end or the other, and sometimes you have to walk through the muck with that?
Can you tell me a little bit? I'm fascinated with that metaphor. Can you tell me a little bit more about the difference between being in the orchestra pit and a jazz quartet?
Absolutely. What yeah, I can, and I wrote this with Rob Hirschfeld. Big shout out to Rob, who's
Hey,
the
Rob.
CEO of Racken now. Um, what we discovered, because he was working at Dell at the time, and Rob started to notice there was a fight, a deep resistance between the hardware people and the software people. So
Hmm.
hardware is more like an architect with bricks. You just install the bricks, you're done. But when you looked at software, sometimes their development operations arc timeline was 6 months beyond what they had predicted. So they were always creating. So the hardware people would install and wait and be upset.
Hmm.
And we sat down and we were like, this had a generational component because back then there were still older executives in the C suite and people managers were usually boomers. And we kind of looked at it and we said, okay, when you're in an orchestra, you have the same training as a jazz musician. But in an orchestra, there's one person who conducts
Right.
and they tell each and every group when they should be louder or lower. And you are told when you're allowed to have a solo, you stand up, you play your solo, you sit down, and you shut up. Okay. And the only way you can move up to the first chair is if someone dies or is sick. And then you can move up in the organization, as they say.
Okay. Yep.
But with jazz, and we noticed this because young people, millennials specifically, were coming in and they wanted to sit with the executives and the C-level people, and they wanted to
Yep.
learn from them. And
Yep.
that's more like jazz. You always see the same training, but you get five guys who sit down or gals, and basically a young person would want to sit in and try to up his game by working with these really established musicians. And nobody was fighting for a chair. You just took your turn, did your solo, and then you'd leave that chair and someone else would pop in. And this was ongoing. So the metaphor was, jazz versus orchestra. Is there control or is there fluid motion for the same goal? Both have a similar goal, but the performance is completely different every single night for a jazz trio or a quartet. And so we started to realize the way you have to manage people in the 21st century is more like jazz.
Thank you for explaining that. That is really interesting. And I'm a piano and guitar player, amateur piano and guitar player. So I really do love the music analogies. And I love the music analogies for another reason, because the only way you improve on any musical instrument is when you practice. And yet, the piano and the guitar and the saxophone, they don't care. They're inanimate objects if you're focused or not. But when you
Right.
decide to focus and practice, that's when you'll improve. And this is not fully baked, but when you were talking, Brad, I'm visualizing the entire orchestra and going back to the brain as the conductor of the orchestra. You know, there's four families of instruments in an orchestra,
Right.
and we have the percussion. It's
That's me.
getting the beat. And I think of that as our own management skills. Management is about process and control. And then I visualize the brass. They're loud. That's our leadership skills. That's where we are trying to influence others. And then the woodwinds is sort of illustrates or symbolizes our technical skills, whatever those might be. But the strings are arguably the most important in the entire orchestra. And that illustrates or symbolizes our self-leadership skills. And the reason why I bring this up is when I talk to folks, younger folks, millennials, even boomers, but millennials, and they say, I want to improve. Sometimes I go through that list. I don't use the orchestra analogy and say, where do you think you need to focus? And the answers are typically in leadership or technical skills. And I say, that's not where you need to start. Where you need to start is your self-leadership skills. That's where it translates to the rest of the family of instruments, so to speak. When you understand your values and you can connect your values to your actions and behaviors, when you can control, monitor, and manage your emotions, when you can take an objective look at your actions and take responsibility, that's all self-leadership. And I think that the HBS, all of the literature that's out there that says leadership skills, they're unfairly taking credit for what are actually self-leadership skills.
Yeah. I wanted to get into that, and I'm glad you segued nicely into that. Self-leadership is about leading yourself, learning that. It just as time management has nothing to do with time. It has to do with managing yourself.
Right.
I think it's a Zen Buddhist quote, and it says, the man who can control himself can control others.
That's right.
And so let's delve into that. What do you suggest to leaders in these positions? Because traditionally, leadership was, hey, I tell you what to do and you do it. And you
Right.
said earlier, it's like, you got to listen now. You got to be in there. You got to have your ear to the railroad tracks, sort of, ear to the ground, listening and anticipating and helping your leaders of today and the people managers and the people they manage
Right.
be uplifted. Let's talk about that self-leadership stuff.
Well, I do want to do a quick callback to your improv jazz quartet metaphor, because I do think that the art of self-leadership is more like jazz than it is playing something, reading music.
Right.
Because it's not like, okay, I'm going to do Beethoven's Fifth and we're just going to go through it like this. That's not what leading yourself looks and feels like, because life is complicated and hard, and so it's more like having to play off all these other instruments. I would say first we have to define just clearly what self-leadership is in distinction to leadership. So obviously leadership is influencing others. Self-leadership is the ability to influence ourselves towards the achievement of our goals. And a question that I like to ask is, what goals? We're taught that we can do anything that we set our mind to. That's all great, but people set their minds to really crappy things, and they have the wrong goals and the wrong values. So we always at Prax start with your priorities, a person's highest priorities. What is occupying your attention? And furthermore, we dig a little bit deeper and say that we have to understand that our aspirations are not our actual values. Our actions are. So it doesn't matter what you say is important. It only matters what you actually do. And there's
Right.
almost always, because we're humans, a gap between those two areas. And so we've got to bridge the gap. That's the foundation for growth. And then one other thing that I want to mention is I think this is a huge mistake that organizations make today, because you're exactly right. I think the old guard is you're going to go do this, you're going to go do this. But the science of growth, one of the first things that has to be present is choice. And so
Mm.
when we continue to volunteer people to go to these leadership workshops, these single sessions, go to this keynote, go over here, and then we expect it to translate to growth on the following Tuesday, that is not the way practice works.
Yeah.
And that's not the way growth works. And so I would say a first step for leaders and organizations is to embrace the fact that it has to be our idea to grow first. And there are ways to nurture that.
Yeah. Stephen M. R. Covey talked about this company over in Germany in his book, Trust and Inspire.
Mm.
And basically, they brought in a new CEO, and he walked into the meeting, and they had goals that were 5 years out, 5 and 7 years out. And he talked about the CEO just walked out and he looked around and he said, I could spend the next year and a half getting to meet everybody, get to learn about you. But let's start right here, right now, with the idea that I already trust you to get the job done.
Mm.
And do you know that they reached their 5-year goals in 2 years, 2 or
That's
3 years, something? Yeah. I want to talk to you about that. How important is trust and inspiration within an organization? And what have you seen on the front lines?
That's a beautiful story and an even more beautiful question. And trust, to me, I'm not breaking any news here, Brad. I think everybody in my position or the leadership industry would say trust is essential. If I can nerd out for a second, there are components of trust that are important to outline. We have this feeling about trust, and then we have things that are present and tangible. So if I were to trust you, Brad, I have some things that I can look to and see that you can demonstrate your credibility and your capability. But then there's another layer of emotional trust that is unspoken. The level of intimacy, sharing, and vulnerability, and then your motivation. And we as human beings, the emotional trust component is 90% of it. It's below the
Right.
iceberg. It's below
Right.
the iceberg. And what that CEO did in that story that you just shared is that he covered 90% of the most important aspects of trust in a very, very, very quick fashion. He came in and said, I trust you, and emotionally, I am going to be here for you. I'm going to be transparent. And my motivation is that I want all of us to get over here. We're here and I want us to get over here. He demonstrated all of those very complex components in very short order. It's absolutely beautiful. I loved it.
Yeah. Something just popped into my head as you were talking. We shifted, and I'm just using sort of a Far East metaphor, and that is that yin yang symbol.
Okay.
We probably went from masculine energy management to more into feminine energy management. And those of you who are listening are now going to go, wait a minute, is this foo-foo, kumbaya stuff? But the reality is when women are in leadership positions, and they've proven this on the S&P 500, if there are 3 or more women sitting on a board of directors, that company does 40% better. Maybe I might be paraphrasing, but they do much better in the S&P 500. Now, I want to correct anybody who's thinking, hey, let's just put some women on the board.
Right.
No, they naturally did this because they felt that sort of that stuff we used to call touchy-feely stuff, the soft skills, is now the most important component that separates the massive companies out there with the 1% that are crushing it consistently.
Yeah.
Would you say I'm correct in sort of we've moved more into that feminine energy, and that doesn't mean we lost our masculine energy. It's just that these organizations are no longer leading with I'm stabbing something today to win the business, and instead moving into farming, metaphor.
Yeah. Well, my master's thesis was on emotional intelligence and leadership, so I'm particularly passionate about this. And you hit the nail on the head. You're exactly right. The literature has overwhelmingly demonstrated that women are emotionally more intelligent than men. And
Mhm.
I'm not also not breaking any news here, but it's worth reminding that emotional intelligence is essentially the ability to monitor and manage ourselves and social relationships. And that's a very large statement. Harvard Business School published in 2024 the top six leadership skills, which, by the way, I believe are self-leadership skills that one must have. And number one was emotional intelligence.
Hmm.
Number one was emotional intelligence. And there's certainly a reason for that. And this has been a very popular idea now for close to 3 decades. Um, I think it was Daniel Goleman that popularized the idea that for leaders to survive and thrive, that they have to be emotional intelligence. It's far more important than any other skill. So let me ask you this, Brad. I completely agree with you on defining and applying its importance. But what aspects of emotional intelligence, from your perspective, might be more important for leaders to embrace today, and what does that look like? I'm curious your take on it.
Oh, absolutely. And for those of you who are listening to my show for the first time, I was a former C-level executive. Please don't be impressed by that. I built a small company, built it up into something much bigger, took it public on NASDAQ, and I have a degree in art and design and commercial art. So how do I make that transition? Like I said before, I made a lot of mistakes. For me, the most powerful thing about emotional intelligence is to control your emotions, because I have on many occasions reacted badly to news that was just not perfect. Start losing it. And what I learned to control that is every time I lost my temper, Andrew, it was because I was missing one key component of the final information that I needed. And it was right over the horizon. So me blasting the doors out, yelling at people, doing whatever. I know I'm painting a big picture here. I was never quite that bad, but what it was is a few minutes later, the component that I needed would come in, and all of a sudden, I'd be embarrassed at my outburst because the solution was right there, and it's like boom, back of the head. Brad, what the hell are you doing?
Right.
So that was number one. The reaction within the moment, the reactive mind. Get control of that a little bit, and that takes time. That takes meditation or just learning to count to 10, creating a good habit in there. The other thing that I learned is taking into account the other person's perspective on how and why they're doing what they do. We as leaders can sometimes be in the best word I can use is solipsistic. There, I said it correctly. Solipsism is really when you think that only your way is the best way, your ideas are the only way, and you don't take in other people's perspectives. And I never really had that as much as say other people because I work in the design field. So everybody's creative input was incredibly important to the final output of a really great product. So whiteboarding, ideation, these were sessions where you had to listen to everybody's input. And now some of it wasn't great ideas, but some matriculated into really better ways of getting it done or building a website or solving a problem. Those two are the most credible part of emotional intelligence, EQ, as they call it. And I learned a lot from Tony Robbins' books as well. Um, Awaken the Giant Within, I think, was the
Yeah.
first book where I was just like, wait a minute. Okay, so if I change my standards, I change my life. What will I tolerate? What will I put up with? And it's the same in leadership. I have a criteria for what I'll put up with and what I won't. And so that includes emotional intelligence.
I want to comment real quick. I stole this, but I think it's a fast coaching cue to remember in the moment. Fast temper slows the mind. When we ramp up really quickly, we don't think very well. In slow temper, fast mind, we can, and you hit on it, we have much clearer solutions to things when we can calm our sympathetic nervous system and take some deep breaths and get that fight or flight back down into the performance zone that we like to refer to. And then the second thing that you mentioned is this ubiquitous buzzword now, empathy in the corporate culture. But what it really means to me is let's stop mind reading. Let's not assume that we know exactly what other people are thinking. And what prevents many people from asking is fear. And so it's just easier to make statements in our head and to feel we fully understand the situation instead of ask, because asking means unknown. But
Right.
when we can feel secure and confident that I am interested in what Brad's perspective is, even if it challenges my own, that's where real connection and progress comes from. And that's what actual empathy looks like in practice.
That's powerful. What you said, when you get angry, yeah, the your mind kind of shrinks because
Yeah.
it goes back to evolution or whatever you believe in. But when we would hunt, we're just like any other animal in the forest. There's a part of us that's still just a mammal. And we start to focus and we miss that there's somebody over here or there's stuff going on. And they've proven this. Our brain kind of goes like this and
Yeah.
becomes laser focused when we're angry. The best story I have for this, I've always wanted to tell this one. I was on the New York subway. This is decades ago. I lived there for 35 years. And I was heading home after work. I think it was the F train I was on. We're heading downtown. And this guy is leaning up against the door, and it's not packed at all. Maybe there were 50 people on the whole subway car. I mean, you can easily hold 150 people on a subway car in New York City, one subway car. So this guy's leaning against the door, reading the New York Times, as New Yorkers do. And the door's open, and this woman gets on, and she decides to stand right in front of him holding the pole. And mind you, there's no one around her. She just decided she's standing right in front of him. And he's, opening and closing the paper. And finally, she starts yelling at him, "Sir, you're being very rude, blah, blah, blah," and yelling and screaming. And we're all sitting there because she was so used to getting on a crowded subway in the morning
Right.
that when
Right.
she got on at night, the bad habit was still there to stand right in
Uh-huh.
front of somebody. And finally, it was getting bad. She was yelling at him and screaming. She was probably the first Karen. And so what I did is I tapped her on the shoulder, and she turned around like, "What?" And I said, "Ma'am, you have an entire subway, and you decided to stand in front of him and get into a fight." And then she got red faced and embarrassed, and she looked around. She realized there's no one on the subway. Everybody was sitting down except me and a couple of other people. And we get like that with anger.
Yeah, I think first of all, very interesting, but the part that I really honed in on, no, is look what happened to her with that bad habit. That anger turned into blame. Whereas if she just would have backed up, which you helped her do, is have a different perspective. But that's what happens to us in those moments, is that anger or frustration automatically translates into blame. And
Yeah.
then it's everyone else's fault and not our own.
Yeah. Oh, it's you know, I hate to say it, but I look back on my own childhood, and my dad was Hungarian, so there was no knee pads and a helmet when I rode a bike,
Mhm.
and it's like, what are you crying about?
Yeah,
That
right.
kind of.
Yeah, toughen up.
And we went from that to where we are today, and it's a much better way, obviously, of getting the very best and brightest in your organization and get the best out of them. I feel this is what we're standing on right now, the precipice of turning your company into mediocre and into greatness. Just the path taking it into greatness at this point. As who was it? Jim Collins, Good to Great. He said it best. This is how companies go from just being
Right.
mediocre to becoming a great brand, and it starts with leadership. So,
Mhm.
thank you so much. I love this conversation, my friend.
Same.
How do we get a hold of you? Uh, what website do we go to, or how do we reach out to you?
Oh, well, thank you for that tee up, Brad. praxleadership.com is how you contact us from a business perspective. I won't give my cell phone over the air. Uh,
No.
just No, I'm teasing. I'm joking. Praxleadership.com is how you contact us, and you can look at our suite of services. And I appreciate the shout out.
Absolutely, man. I am very jazzed to have you on the show today. Thank you. Thank you for being on Awakened Nation, my friend.
You bet. It was my pleasure. And if there is a next time, I'd like to tell you why I admire Nate Bargatze and a few other comedians as well.
Well, we can talk about that. He's one of mine as well, because we're going to go into the lightning round. So I might as well ask you.
All right.
Yeah. So I guess my number one question, my first question is, what's it like to work with your brother?
Oh, I get this question a lot, Brad. And I think the reason I get it is that people, for the most part, can't fathom working with family. And
Yeah.
so that's why it's a popular question. And I always say, and so does Alex, that we don't work with just any family. And the implication there is that there's a lot of people that are in our family that we don't work with. I have been blessed. My brother's 6 years older, and he is one of my heroes and a mentor. And I absolutely adore him and respect him. And he feels similarly about me. And we've always taken care of each other. We've fought, we've had conflict, we've disagreed, but there's been a mutual love and respect between us, and it's allowed us to really thrive in professional circumstances. And frankly, that model has helped us hire our team members as well, because we see what good looks like, and so we try to replicate that with the people that we surround ourselves with.
I love that. Because it's really hard to work with family
It
members.
is.
I mean, I've tried to work with a spouse, and it's not easy.
It's
Uh,
not. You're right.
they definitely see your faults before you do. And
Yep.
I actually have an uncle through marriage who's 3 years younger than me, and I consider him like my little brother. And we've done some writing together. We did some scripts, and that was fun, but it was really hard on both of us because we were trying to help each other learn about the writing process, which made me a better writer. It's why I was able to write a few books. Um,
Feedback is hard from family, and
yeah.
that's what makes it even more difficult.
You're so right. Feedback. Well, you remember when Dad did, and you're
Right.
like, we're 40 years old.
That's right.
Relax. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
My second question is you mentioned your favorite comedians. Yeah, and you mentioned Nate Bargatze, genius. And I like Sebastian. I get his.
Manicoli.
Yes,
Manicoli.
he's hilarious. He goes, "This guy got a tattoo." I love his style. Who is your favorite comedian?
Oh, I would say my all-time favorite is probably Rodney Dangerfield.
Hey, I'm telling you. Hey.
Yeah, I saw him with my brother at my brother's bachelor party in 2001. This is a couple years before he passed, and I just have to tell you this, Brad, really quickly. Never seen a human being so dialed in for 2 hours, just rapid fire jokes. If you were laughing, which you were, you missed the next two or three jokes, so you only got
Yeah.
3% of the show. But I'll never forget this scene. Rodney Dangerfield's up on stage, and he had a waitress on his left and a waitress on his right. And the waitress on the left was in charge of refilling his cigarette, and the waitress on the right was in charge of refilling his scotch. For 2 hours, if when this ran out, she came on stage, gave him a new one. When this ran out, came on stage, gave him a new one, and he never stopped. It was unbelievable.
Hey, I get no respect.
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly
Uh,
right. My favorite, really quick, my favorite joke that he told was, my doctor said I'm an alcoholic, and I said, "How did you know?" And he said, "Well, I found an olive in your urine sample."
My favorite joke is, "Hey, I get no respect. The other day, my kids put crazy glue in my preparation H."
Yeah, so
Uh,
awesome.
I have a friend of mine, big shout out to Dan. He could do 2 hours of Rodney Dangerfield one-liners, and he used to. We would go to New York City museums because he used to be an art history teacher. We'd go up to MoMA, and for 2 hours we're walking around, and we're laughing. We're standing in front of all these modern art paintings, rolling laughing because he's just rolling out one Dangerfield
I got to
after
meet
the
this
next.
guy.
Yeah, Dan is incredible. But yeah, oh Lord, that was funny. My third and final question, and this will be a two-parter if you want. The first is, what's your favorite memory? And if that ties into what do we know about you that you're passionate about, that we don't know about you?
Hmm. Favorite memory, my goodness. Well, I, I've got a couple that come to mind. I have the day that I got married is a very joyful memory, and then the birth of your children, obviously, those are very
Yeah.
cliche, but still beautiful. But I would say one of my favorite, my dad passed away in 2019 at 75. He was in generally great health and declined really quickly. So over the last several years, I've reflected on so many of my memories with him. And I will say one of my favorite memories is it was a very difficult conversation that he chose to have with me. And I went to a small school in Chicago called Wheaton College. It's a little Christian school and played
Hmm.
soccer up there. And I was playing soccer and not doing school. And grades were pitiful. And one Christmas after my sophomore year, my dad said, "Come out to the garage with me." And he brought me out into the garage, and there was two buckets sitting about 3 feet away from each other. And he sat down on the bucket and encouraged me to sit down on the other bucket. And I'm like, I don't know where this is going. And everybody else is inside, friends and family are inside. And he told me that he was pulling me out of school and pulling all of my funding. No more credit card. You're going to move out of your dorm in Chicago and come back and live with mom and dad. And I was pissed,
Yeah.
pissed. And it was the most calm and loving. I remember my dad being in an incredibly difficult scenario that I was fighting back on. And I look back on that memory so fondly because he did a dad thing that was
Yeah.
really hard. And he loved me so close, even though he knew I was going to react so poorly.
Wow. That's beautiful. Because I think the relationship with our fathers is what defines us in adulthood as men, especially when they're gone.
Yeah.
And I love that. And I'm picturing that right now because my dad was, he could be like that. He wasn't quite as how should we say, deep as your dad. He was pretty
My
much
dad had some fire too.
do it
Don't get me
do it this
wrong.
way. Yeah, do it this way or else.
Yeah.
But there were moments when I could just see that that's my dad. He did something great. And I think wow, you are a shining example of your father. You're carrying
Oh,
on his mission of being that gentle soul who comes at us with strength, compassion, and what did you say earlier? You listen. You
that's
listen.
right. That's exactly right. What a novel concept.
Got it. Ladies and gentlemen, please reach out to Andrew Jez-Bray. A fantastic interview. And I can't wait to share this with some of my friends in HR and learning and development. Just phenomenal. Also, go to praxleadership.com. Everything is over there, measurable. That's what I like, measurable leadership. And when are you writing a book? Are you going to write a book about all this
I am.
experience?
I am. I appreciate all these tee ups. Yeah, I'm getting my PhD and writing a book, and the book does not have a title yet, but it will be about self-leadership and partly about my journey, but the importance and how it's neglected in organizational culture.
It is.
And leadership is like the A-list celebrity, and everybody wants to hear about leadership, but self-leadership is like this redheaded stepchild that honestly belongs in higher status. So that's essentially what I'm writing about. Thank you for bringing it up.
Excellent. Andrew Jez-Bray, ladies and gentlemen, please reach out. Andrew, thank you so much for being on Awakened Nation, my friend. Thank you.
Brad, I really enjoyed being with you. Love your platform, Awaken Nation. I am a fan of the show, and now I'll be watching from now on. And I do have a question for you. Who would
Sure.
you like to interview next? And if I know him, I'll call him.
I definitely am trying to get Gene Simmons on the show because I have a very powerful question. Yes, Gene Simmons from KISS,
Mhm.
but CEOs, I love,
Okay.
CEOs, people who have grown a business from nothing all the way up. I've had Brian Smith on the show who founded Uggs here in the United States. And he was a phenomenal interview, but like most Australians, he would swear every other word, uh, which was great. Back then, I didn't bleep out those swear words. It just came. It's a freaking great question, Brad. Um,
Yeah.
But yeah, anybody, the premise of the show is anybody who's fallen down, got back up, created something unique, the outliers, the game changers, people who've stumbled in life. And we've had everybody on, from people who serve ayahuasca to people who shot themselves in the head and survived, to
Wow.
leadership experts, like Stephen M. R. Covey and Dr. Joe Vitale from The Secret. Yeah. And we're
I've got a
listening.
couple of ideas. I'll email you.
Thank you. That'd be great. We're listed now in 95 countries, and also we're in the top 10% of video podcasts on Spotify.
Wow.
And also globally, we're in the top 5%. So 5 years, we're starting to make some headway
Noise,
now.
huh?
Yeah, I'm
Well, I can
excited.
see why, Brad. You're an engaging person and a great interviewer, and I really appreciate being with you.
Andrew, thank you so much for the kind words. I really appreciate it. Thanks, brother.
See you, Brad.
You bet. Hey, everybody, don't forget to tune in next week. We're going to have another extraordinary guest here on Awakened Nation. Until then, bye-bye for now. See you, Andrew.
I know.
Thank you so much for being a big part of the Awakened Nation movement. This is how you can help me and our extraordinary guests. If you guys enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe and share this episode out on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And let's grow this movement by word of mouth. Our success is because of you. Thank you, and see you next week.